In this video, I'm going to show you a very fun open work pattern that you can knit on your single bed knitting machine. For this example, I casted on 60 stitches. Before beginning transferring, make sure that your carriage is on the right side. Using my two-prong tool, I will begin transferring right in the center, and I usually like to begin in the center because this way I know that my pattern is centered and I'm going to have the same amount of stitches each side. We can see this is the center point, and I'm going to grab 2 stitches each side and we'll transfer over 2 to the right, and then again over 2 to the left. And now I have 4 needles out of action in the very middle and 2 needles here that have 2 stitches on them. We'll continue across. For the next transfer, I'm going to skip the 2 needles that have 2 stitches on them, and we'll count 2 4 stitches. And I like to pull the needles a little bit out. This way it's easier to see what I'm doing. And I know that the next 2 stitches I'm going to transfer will go on top of the next 2 needles. So I will skip these 2, grab the next, and then again transfer them over 2 on top of these needles. And just like I did in the very center, I want to have 4 empty needles right here. So I'm going to pick up 2 stitches again and we'll transfer them over 2 to the right, like so. This is just how I like to count, because I know that in between the 2 needles that have 2 stitches on them, there will be 4 needles. And this is just how I like to keep track and how it makes sense to me. But obviously you can count these however you like. All you have to know that I have 4 needles out of action with 8 needles in action across the entire bed. These are the 2 needles with 2 stitches. We'll count 2, 4. And then I know that the next 2 stitches will fall on top of these 2 needles. We'll continue on the other side. And now I can just pull the needles all the way out and knit across. And I will knit 1 row from right to left. And for the next transfer, I will be using my one-prong tool, and we'll transfer just 1 stitch either side. I try to transfer 2 just like before, but then there's too much pressure and I'm just worried that my yarn will snap. Obviously, you can adapt this design however you prefer. I'm just showing you some ideas and then you can use them in your own way. And now using my one-prong tool, I will be picking the 2 stitches each side of these 4 and transfer them just over 1 to the right and to the left, like so. We'll continue that across. Pull the needles all the way out. And you can see now that we have 6 needles in action with 6 out of action across. We'll knit 1 more row from left to right. And for the next step, I'm going to pull all the needles all the way out. And using a contrast yarn, I will be wrapping just like I would normally do when I begin my sample. And all I'm trying to do is just to cast on stitches on top of these needles that have no stitches on them. I finished e-wrapping, and now what I want to do is take this yarn to the other side. So basically what I'm trying to do here, I want to begin e-wrapping every single time from left to right, because this is the most comfortable for me. I could of course e-wrap from right to left. I'm not as comfortable to do it like that, and it's a bit slower. So what I can do now is just take my main yarn from my yarn feeder, and we'll place the yarn that I used to e-wrap with in feeder A, and we'll knit across from right to left. You can see that these stitches are knitting nicely, so I just basically cast on just like I would do on a very first row. And I want now to continue knitting with my main yarn that I started, so I just want to move the carriage back to the right side where the end of this yarn is, and this way I'm just avoiding snapping yarn. We'll remove again that yarn that I used to e-wrap and knit the first row. I'll remove that from my yarn feeder. And there's two options here depending on the machine you have. I could either press both partial cams just to move my carriage across. You can see I'm not knitting. I could also put my carriage on holding position by moving this little knob from end to edge. I will have to also pull the needles all the way out and just move the carriage across. These are two options you can use depending on what machine you have and whatever you find easier. So I'll just cancel my holding position. I have my main yarn back in my yarn feeder, and I'm going to knit 4 rows. If you want to be safe and you want to make sure that these needles are knitting properly, you can always pull the needles all the way out. But I think it's going to knit fine, so I'm just going to go across. So I knitted 4 rows and my carriage ended up back on the right side. You can of course knit more rows or less rows depending on what you want to achieve. And for the next row, I'm going to actually stagger these holes, so I'm going to have holes in these sections here instead of there. It is easy to see that these were the 6 needles that we had previously in action, and now we want to have out of action. And now to transfer for the next row, I think just doing the first one is going to be a bit more tricky, but once you've done the first one, should be fine. And all you have to do is to make sure you transfer again right in the middle of that. So I could just count 1, 2, 3 from the side and pick 2 stitches, and just like I did before, transfer over 2 to the right, and then the same on the other side to the left. And once we know that the first one is in the right place, we can just count 2, 4, and we know the 2 stitches will fall on the next 2, and continue across to have 4 needles out of action with 8 needles in action in between. And just like before, pull the needles all the way out and knit 1 row. Continue with another transfer using a 1-prong tool. Pull the needles all the way out and knit another row, and again we have 6 needles in action with 6 out of action across. Pull the needles all the way out, and again e-wrap so you can cast on stitches on those needles. And again remove my main yarn from the yarn feeder. Place the yarn that I used to e-wrap Knit across from right to left. Take the yarn out of the yarn feeder and press the 2 partial cams just to move the carriage across. We'll place my main yarn again and knit 4 rows. And we completed 1 repeat of the pattern. If you would like to begin another repeat, you can just start transferring from the middle, but of course you can go back to the beginning of the video and watch again. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video inspiring and you learned a couple of new things. As always, if you do give this a try, please make sure to message me or tag me on Instagram. And also, I would really appreciate if you consider subscribing. I can see in my analytics that actually half of the people that are watching the videos are not subscribed. So please consider doing that. It really helps the channel. And also I have a lot of content coming up. Next week, for example, I'm going to upload a video all about intarsia. And as always, I come with little things for my Patreon. So there will be a few fun patterns